Happy Friday the 13th. What's Under the Bed is on hiatus during the writers and actors strikes, but we could not let a Friday the 13th in October pass by without celebrating. Please enjoy this special episode of What's Under the Bed and watch my conversation with the creative force behind the viral sensations, Weird Arby's Guy, Weird Satanist Guy, also known as the character ONYX the Fortuitous. Andrew BOWSER is an actor, writer, director, podcaster, and viral content creator. His new movie, ONYX the Fortuitous and the Talisman of Souls, will be in theaters on October 19th for one day only. Go to theonyxmovie.com for tickets. What's Under the Bed stands in solidarity with the Screen Actors Guild, and so does my guest, Andrew BOWSER. The makers of ONYX the Fortuitous and the Talisman of Souls have secured an interim agreement with the Screen Actors Guild that allows Andrew to promote the film and speak with me. Stay tuned for a peek at the trailer.
Marcus Trilberry can't catch a break.
Order up, number 46.
At his work, he gets no respect.
What, Marcus? I was just wondering if you got my new name tag in yet? Because this says Marquay Dickberry.
At his home, he gets no love.
I could understand if your father was still in the house, but this is Tom, your stepfather, and my lover.
And with his friends, oh, he doesn't have any. But all he needs is a chance.
Congratulations, congratulations, congratulations.
I've been invited to Bartok's mansion to take part in a once-in-a-lifetime ritual in which he, along with 5 of his most loyal followers, will attempt to raise the spirit of the ancient demon, Abaddon.
You're not going anywhere until you scoop that litter box.
Now he's off on an adventure.
Is the ritual going to work? Shall we lay to the talisman?
All 5 are present. The Queen, the Viking, a werewolf, the witch, and you are the Virgin.
What the
When it's the end of the world, a new hero must rise.
Patty Slinger?
When in doubt, skewer it out.
In the grimoire, after the ritual of Abaddon, there was a warning. Beware the prophecy of the fortuitous one.
What? What?
What?
Marcus Trilberry and the
I'd really love it if you called me ONYX the Fortuitous.
ONYX the Fortuitous and the Talisman of Souls.
Oh, hey. What are y'all doing in here?
Start recording.
I like those posters. Are those
Thanks.
that a
Thank you.
digital backdrop, or are those physically hanging in your space?
They're physically, they're there. We got them ourselves.
That's fantastic. I'm
That's really cool. Yeah.
going to take a screenshot of that.
My guest today is writer, director, actor, host, podcaster, editor, Vespa enthusiast, cat daddy, and social media viral sensation, Andrew BOWSER. He's a multifaceted content creator known for his odd brand of genre-bending comedy. He directed the features The Mother of Invention, Jimmy Tupper versus the Goat Man of Bowie, and Worm. They were all critical successes on the film circuits. He served as the in-house director for Chris Hardwick's Nerdist Industries, creating the majority of their branded content. While at Nerdist, he brought his character ONYX the Fortuitous to a new audience through the web series. Welcome to the Shadow Zone. His YouTube channel has more than 270,000 subscribers, and the TikTok channel for ONYX the Fortuitous, Slayer of the Bright Realm, has more than 1 million followers. Among his many duties, he could also be found co-hosting the podcasts Bizarre States and The Untold Hour with Jessica Chobot. Now, my guest's beloved character, ONYX the Fortuitous, will be gracing the big screen with the feature film ONYX the Fortuitous and the Talisman of Souls that premiered this year at the Sundance Film Festival and will be released in theaters October 19th. It stars Olivia Taylor-Dudley, Arden Mirren, Ralph Ineson, Rivka Reyes, T.C. Carson, and two of the greatest horror icons, Barbara Crampton and Jeffrey Combs. Of course, the title character is performed wonderfully by today's guest. Andrew, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you taking the time.
You were born and raised in the city of Bowie in Prince George's County, Maryland. What were you like as a young child growing up in Bowie?
Oh my gosh, what a wonderful photo you have there. Well, I was a introspective child, I guess, but I was also a bit of an extrovert because I started performing when I was little. But I think me performing was more out of me really wanting to investigate imaginative or imagined worlds, I would say. So I liked watching animation. I liked watching films, and that is what led to me wanting to act and kind of play in those worlds. And that hasn't stopped. I mean, that's what's continued even to this very day, of me kind of wanting to build out my own imagined worlds and then have fun playing inside of them.
What's Under the Bed is a show where I speak with horror filmmakers about their biographies, careers, and the things that shaped what scares them. Before the influence of movies, what scared you the most as a child? Was there a ghost in the attic or a monster under the bed?
You know, I actually had really bad nightmares as a kid. And so I was scared to go to sleep. That was what frightened me. Before I'd ever read a comic book or watched a scary movie, I had a really overactive imagination and had nightmares that were so bad, I would have panic attacks prior to laying down at night. So that was the first thing that scared me. And I don't know where those nightmares came from, but they were vivid and very real to me. And that's why even in the film ONYX the Fortuitous, he talks about waking up and screaming at the top of his lungs from having a bad dream, because that's what would happen to me as a kid. And then the irony is, I think the more I investigated what scared me by watching horror films and reading even horror comics, I became less afraid as a person.
Many kids are first introduced to horror through children's stories like Three Billy Goats Gruff or Hansel and Gretel. Were there any fairy tales or stories that scared you or excited you most as a child?
Well, for better or for worse, the best answer for me to give is the Bible, because I grew up in a not the most religious household, but I grew up in a family that went to church, and we went to a Methodist church. And a lot of those stories, I realize in hindsight, were what scared me. I mean, you're hearing about God and the devil and heaven and hell and eternal damnation and torture and sin and all sorts of things that for a kid that already wrestled with anxiety, they really pushed me into a place of fear, and that, I guess, would be the fairy tale that terrified me. And that even makes its way into ONYX. I mean, he's obsessed with those grandiose notions, and he's even obsessed placing himself at the center of those things. His soul is at the center between God and the devil, and he's worried about getting torn in twain. That's 8-year-old me trying to wrestle with those kind of cosmic notions.
The closed Governor's Bridge spans the Patuxent River less than 10 miles from your childhood home. Legend says in the 1970s, there was a scientist at the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center who conducted experiments with human DNA along with the DNA from goats. The unthinkable happened when an abomination let loose into the woods of Bowie. The creature known as the Goat Man is said to roam the woods near the bridge, which locals renamed Goat Man Bridge. Those brave enough to park under the bridge at night should prepare to have their car pelted with rocks. There are claims of shrill screams from the woods and rumors of some unlucky thrill seekers who are attacked and dragged away by the Goat Man, never to be heard from again. When did you first hear about the Goat Man, and were there other urban legends you heard about growing up?
The two things that I heard about growing up that actually ultimately kind of crossed into one, were the Goat Man legend, and then a haunted, abandoned hospital called Glendale Hospital. And I thought they were kind of separate urban legends. People said that at Glendale, if you walked around, you would hear screams or distant cries, and there would be apparitions roaming the halls. I even had a friend who swore he saw an apparition standing in a hallway of Glendale Hospital in a hospital gown. And then separately, there was the Goat Man, as you explained, this creature that would roam Governor's Bridge. And it turns out people also say the Goat Man roams Glendale Hospital. So when I went to write my Goat Man movie, I never got to make this, but I outlined a sequel that takes the Goat Man into Glendale Hospital and my character into the hospital and underground the hospital to find out where these creatures are habitating.
Oh my God.
And but those were the two things that always stood out to me, as well as growing up near Washington, D.C., where the famed Exorcist steps are in Georgetown. And I would go and visit those steps in high school just to look at that location. But the Goat Man was the one that really captured my imagination.
You had an imagination for fantasy as a kid, as you said earlier. You'd play Ninja Turtles and Ghostbusters with your best friend Alex. You began drawing comics to draw comics and write stories. I heard you turned in a draft for a third Gremlins movie for an elementary school assignment. Who was the Born Losers crew when you were a kid?
The Born Losers was a crew of friends in middle school that consisted of myself, my buddy Mark, my buddy Mickey, my buddy Justin, and my buddy Grant. And we all drew comic strips, and we would begin a comic strip and then pass it off to a friend, and then they would finish it or do the middle, and then the next friend would finish the comic strip, and we would just do that on a cycle. And yeah, we called ourselves the Born Losers, and we all had kind of superhero monikers, and we were all, pretty oafish superheroes that weren't the most successful heroes. And that was how we got through middle school, was keeping ourselves entertained with our weird art. And I should find those comic strips and release them as a hardcover graphic novel one day.
You should.
Yeah.
As you said, acting began at 8 years old when you landed the role of Winthrop alongside your dad in a community theater production of The Music Man. You reprised the role for a dinner theater version of a few months later. Next, you get a manager, you book a series of radio commercials, then you land a role in The Secret Garden that has you and your mother traveling the world with a show for 9 months. Do any films of your performances or any of your, well, you said your comic strips probably still exist, but do any films of your performances still exist?
I don't think there's any filmed footage. Actually, that's not true. When we were in Japan with The Secret Garden, we did a lot of filming backstage. Our guardian was a wonderful man named Bowie, and we had, it must have been a mini DV camera or even maybe like a Hi8, and we did a lot of filming backstage and even made little sketches. And I would have to assume that at some point he filmed us out on stage, and so it must exist, but in a kind of informal home movies scenario, not in any kind of like formally shot production. But I know there's some embarrassing bits of me on video doing Jim Carrey impressions backstage and thinking funniest person alive. Yeah.
Amazing. You attended Suitland High School. Go Rams. You focus on screenwriting. You're renting the 5 movies for $5 at the video store each week and watching everything. You take a job at Hoyt's movie theater in Bowie, where your manager was named Richard Tully. What were you like in high school, and how much of your high school experience do you think informs who you are today?
Well, my high school experience was very, very informative and shaped me in many ways as an artist. Similar to the Born Losers in middle school, I linked up with a crew of artists, and my good friend Nathan and Peter and Eddie, we would all draw cartoons and anime characters, etc., to keep ourselves entertained. And even though high school got tougher, because, you know, all of a sudden the kids are a little meaner and the bullies are a little bigger. We still found solace in our little artistic community. And I was lucky to find that. I also started taking photography lessons, and going into the dark room to develop photos was a big respite from the toughness of the school, because it wasn't an easy school to navigate socially by any means, but having the artistic outlet again made it a lot safer for me.
In an age of COVID lockdowns and active shooter drills, do you think horror movies can provide catharsis for teenagers trying to cope with these real life fears?
I think so. I think it's important to investigate healthy ways to process anxiety and fear. And I know for me, looking back, that's what I was doing when, you know, I was in high school when the Columbine tragedy occurred. And it was really devastating to obviously the entire country. But to be a high schooler at the time, it was very destabilizing. And I know it wasn't the first tragedy of that type, but that happening at that age, you know, was hard. And I can't imagine what it's like now for students having lived through so many of those tragedies. And I think it drove me to investigate horror and confronting the things that frightened me in a controlled environment, because there's nothing more terrifying than those things happening in an uncontrolled environment. And I think writing and dramatizing the themes that shake us a little can be healthy. Otherwise, I know for me, I would just become overwhelmed by those fears and probably not be able to function very well if I didn't have a means to process that stuff.
Yeah. You appeared in an episode of Homicide: Life on the Streets with Elijah Wood when you were a kid. Would you tell me about being recognized for this role on your first day of high school?
Well, yes. My first day of high school, someone called me out for having played a murderer. And they said in the middle of the hallway, "Oh, hey, you're the guy that killed that kid." And everyone turns and looks at me, not knowing he's talking about a role I played. And then luckily, the guy laughed and then gave everyone context and said, "Oh, I saw him on TV last week. I saw him on Homicide," because it was a show that was shot nearby in Baltimore. So a lot of people were familiar with it. So as soon as he name dropped Homicide, people relaxed. But yes, at first it was a very odd context to meet my fellow students in.
You've said you love comedy and horror together, and Cats. Do you think comedies age better than horror movies, or is it the other way around?
I think they can both suffer from similar problems. I mean, anything that's created is created during a certain moment in time. And I think I rewatch a lot of the horror movies that I grew up on loving and a lot of the comedies that I grew up on loving, and I can recognize that they would benefit from a more modern lens. And I think that's what I'm attempting to do, is make things that might spiritually feel similar to comedy and horror from the era that I grew up in, but are through a modern lens, and hopefully won't feel as dated, because they are looking out for a larger group of people. They're more hopefully inclusive in their storytelling and in what characters they give agency to and respect to. And I think it's important to look back at the films that inspired us and understand what worked and what didn't work. And, you know, and that's okay. It's okay for me to rewatch Ghostbusters and say, you know, some of this is a little, Venkman's a little creepy. And that's okay. You know, we'll do better as we keep exploring those concepts in the genre now.
You attended 2 years of film school at the School of Visual Arts, then leave to direct music videos. You play in a band and release the song Caps Rap about the Washington Capitals hockey team. What was the name of your band? And do you believe more songs have been written about love, lust, or heartbreak?
Ooh. Well, the name of my band was named after my grandmother, and her name was Zella Maisel. And that was her real name. And
That is an awesome name.
yeah, so that was the name of our band. I think, I think there's the obvious answer is that I think more has been written about love, but in the subgenre of music that I was in, I guess you would say more was written about heartbreak, because it was a very emo screamo type of band, and you had to have some pathos, and you had to be a little tortured to operate within that genre. And so I think that's where Zella Maisel squarely sat, was just maybe a little too tortured too. Maybe a bit of it was self-inflicted, for the sake of having something to write about, but it is what it is.
You write and produce some indie films with your roommate Joseph Petrick. You direct The Mother of Invention that starred former guest and friend of the show, Dee Wallace. Then write and direct Jimmy Tupper versus the Goat Man of Bowie. These are my nod to that film.
Nice, yeah.
Will we ever get to see Jimmy Tupper versus the Goat Men of Bowie? I know, Bowie, you've said that you never got to make it, but
yeah,
is there a possibility?
Well, I am always encouraged when I hear directors talk about a new film and they say, oh, it's actually something I wrote 12 years ago, or oh, this was actually the first film I ever wanted to make, and I just couldn't until now. So part of me does wonder if there's a world where Jimmy Tupper comes back around, whether it's a soft reboot, because not many people know of the film, but I still love the mythology, and I loved the world that we were building out to explore in a second one. And maybe ultimately I'll look back one day and realize the first film was just a proof of concept for a bigger project. I do want to make something with a cryptid. I love folklore around cryptozoology. So whether it's Goatman or something else, I hope to do an action adventure horror project about a cryptid.
In 2012, you give us the edge of your seat thriller Worm, just right there. You shoot this over one day, Labor Day, all over the town of Guthrie, Oklahoma. You do it in 2 takes entirely with a GoPro rigged on a Snorri cam. Next, you're the house director at Nerdist Studios. You host podcasts. You meet your producing, writing collaborator, Olivia Taylor-Dudley. I would love to have her on the show. And you create the character ONYX the Fortuitous. Your inspirations for ONYX stem from an improv class, years of editing reality TV auditions, and film conventions. The character is so beloved by fans, the movie seemed inevitable. And I loved it. Without spoiling anything, what can you tell the viewers about the movie?
Well, I think it's important to let people know that the movie is very much for fans of ONYX, but it's also very much for people that have never seen the character before. I attempted to make something that was self-contained. There are Easter eggs and quotes and references to the older ONYX videos, if you are familiar with them, but none of those quotes and none of those references will feel like inside jokes that would alienate somebody watching the film as their introduction to the character. And I would encourage people to, even if they don't like horror, to give it a shot, because it's a bit like a gateway horror film would have been for me as a child. Something that had some scary elements, but and some gothic overtones, but that wasn't too gory or too aggressive for what I could handle as a kid. It's meant to feel like that, but now a bit of gateway horror with puppets and a lot of humor and heart as well.
ONYX the Fortuitous and the Talisman of Souls is filmed over 20 days at the haunted Ventford mansion located in the Berkshires. While you were there, I hear the crew stayed at a nearby inn, also haunted. Can you tell me about any paranormal experiences you or the cast and crew experienced while filming ONYX?
Yes, there was a day where I didn't experience it personally, but I got to set at Ventford Hall, and I could tell there was a lot of chatter, especially amongst our AD and some of our production assistants, our second AD. And it turns out somebody had heard something and recorded it, a distant voice or distant laughter, and yet they were on a floor where no one else was. And so that recording was being passed around, and I heard it, and I will say it did sound a little ethereal. It didn't sound like it was a crew member, chuckling down the hall. It was interesting and a little unnerving. I never felt the presence of anything, but I might have just been too focused on making the day and getting our shots to have felt anything. But other people did feel kind of a thickness in the air in certain rooms. And there were even some rooms that some of our cast didn't like going into until it was time to shoot. So if we had a scene that took place in Bartok's study, some of our cast felt like the study was just a little heavy and a little unsettling. So we would rehearse outside and block it and get it all baked in before going in to film, because they didn't want to be in that room for any longer than they had to be. But I never felt any of that. But again, that might have just been because I was too focused. There could have been a ghost right behind me tapping me on the head, and I wouldn't have clocked it because I was too focused.
Barbara Crampton is wonderful in the movie as your mother, and the casting of Combs as Bartok the Great is inspired. Of course, Barbara Crampton and Jeffrey Combs are horror legends who first appeared together in Stuart Gordon's film The Reanimator. Brian Usna was Gordon's producing partner and collaborator. I was able to have him as a guest, and we talked about Stuart Gordon, who we lost in 2020. Would you tell me about when you met Stuart Gordon?
Oh, wow. Yes. So I was a casting editor for reality TV, and I was cutting audition tapes, I think, for the game show Wipeout. And, I was feeling pretty bad for myself because I had moved to LA to be a director. And here I was cutting casting tapes for things like Real Housewives and Parental Control. In hindsight, I should have just been very thankful that I had work in Los Angeles and could pay rent. But I was also, I had my eyes on other things and on bigger things. And I was walking around on my lunch break outside of a small strip mall / office space area in Burbank, and was feeling particularly down on myself for not having a film project going. And I looked up in a window of an office, and I saw the poster for Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. And I thought, well, that's odd. And then I looked in a little deeper, and I saw a poster for Reanimator. And I thought, well, the commonality there is Stuart Gordon. And I went around to the front and knocked on the door. I thought I was going to ask, oh, so what exactly is this office? Because I see these posters. But Stuart himself opens the door. And I tell him, oh, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm a huge fan. I just saw the posters through the window. And he's like, come in. And I went in and sat down, and we just had a chat for about 20 minutes. And I told him a bit about my frustrations around where I was in my career, but that I was prepping a short film that was very much inspired by Reanimator. It was called Monster Machine. And he just encouraged me and just said, just make what you can when you can make it. Don't get too bogged down with what isn't happening or what didn't happen, and do whatever you are doing to the best of your abilities. And that's really all you have control over. And I went and made that short film, and that led to a lot of the relationships with people that I still work with today. But the fact that Stuart asked me into his office and had that conversation with me really left an indelible mark.
The puppets are a beautiful part of this movie and provide a wonderful throwback to the 80s films like The Dark Crystal, Gremlins, or Flight of the Navigator. Just a quick little fun fact, my grandmother worked on the locations for Flight of the Navigator.
I love that movie.
Yeah, several of your puppets are zombie versions of different characters. Do you prefer fast zombies or slow zombies?
I am old school when it comes to zombies, and I prefer slow zombies. I do love Night of the Living Dead, but I'm also a fan of Return of the Living Dead. So I also like punk rock zombies, and I like zombies with a little personality and color. And I like having fun with that mythology in a way that's a bit subversive, but it's still slow moving zombies all the way.
Mm-hmm. I heard you might have up to 5 more ONYX movies outlined. Will we get to see a sequel?
I hope so. I think the feature Talisman of Souls really unlocked an understanding from my perspective in regards to what you can do with this character and what I could explore with the ensemble that we've built and the villains that we've built out and the mythology that we've just kind of started to dial in. So I really hope we get to make a second one. And if we get to do any more beyond that, who knows? But I would at least like to see a sequel come to fruition.
This last question is a Sophie's choice. Two must die so that one may live. The comedy works of Andy Kaufman, the horror classic Pumpkinhead, or the 80s sitcom Perfect Strangers.
Oh no.
Which two dies and which one lives?
Oh my gosh. Andy Kaufman, Pumpkinhead, and Perfect Strangers. Is that what you said?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, wow. Two must die. To be honest, I would have to. Oh, wow. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I guess I would let Pumpkinhead and Perfect Strangers die so that Kaufman could live, which is crazy because I didn't think there was a world where I would do that to Balky. But Kaufman, I think, is just kind of in my DNA. And I went through a long period of being deeply fascinated by him and what he was interested in as a performer and as somebody that would kind of subvert expectations, but still really do the work and do the comedic work. So I don't think I would want to lose Kaufman, even if it meant losing Pumpkinhead and Cousin Larry.
I want
but
to
if you had put family ties in that might have been a different conversation.
I want to congratulate you on your movie. I had a chance to see it and I thought it was a wonderful time. It's great to see you explore more of ONYX and his world. The puppetry is amazing as well as the cast. It's spooky, funny, has lots of heart, and it's masterfully executed. I look forward to seeing more of your work on the big screen. Is there anything you want to ask me before we're done?
Well, I would be curious to know what was your kind of gateway horror film? What was the thing that got you interested in this genre?
My first ever movie that my first ever horror movie that I actually finished was Jaws. I watched Jaws. The Blob was the first movie I had ever started that was a horror movie, but I never got to finish that until like 3 years ago. And I started it at 4 years old. I am 16.
Wow.
It took me 12 years to finish The Blob.
What caused the delay in finishing it?
I was terrified of it for the longest of times. It was the first scene. It jumped from the stick onto the old guy's hand, and I was like, "Stop it there, there, done." And then I didn't watch it for another 12 years.
Well, congratulations on finishing The Blob.
Thank you, and thank you so much for this interview. I had a blast.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time and for being so informed. It means a lot.
Thank you.